Imagine earning $80,000 a year, a salary that used to buy the American dream, only to realize it can barely buy you a parking spot. In America's wealthiest tech hubs, a quiet emergency is unfolding. The people who teach your kids, rescue your pets, and deliver your food are punching out their full-time shifts and driving home to their cars. This isn't a story of financial ruin. It's a story of full-time employment. How did the world's most prosperous cities transform the middle class into a new class of working homeless? Let's find out. The six-figure poverty line. For decades, the dominant cultural narrative surrounding homelessness in the United States has been built upon a specific, rigid set of assumptions. The collective imagination typically attributes housing insecurity to catastrophic individual failure, acute substance abuse, severe and unmanaged mental illness, or chronic, long-term unemployment. This traditional perspective views the unhoused population as entirely distinct from the functional machinery of the modern economy. However, across the hyper-prosperous urban centers of the 21st century, this old paradigm has completely fractured. A new demographic has emerged that defies every historical stereotype. They are the working unhoused, a hidden population of clean-shaven, neatly dressed professionals who hold stable, 40-hour-a-week jobs, possess corporate badges, and receive regular direct deposits, yet have been completely systematically locked out of the housing market. This reality gap is illustrated by staggering shifts in federal data. In metropolitan areas like San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has repeatedly updated its metrics to reflect an unprecedented economic distortion. In these jurisdictions, a single individual earning over $80,000 a year, or a family if we're bringing in over $100,000 annually, is officially classified as low income. In cities like San Jose and Seattle, salaries that would place a household comfortably in the upper middle class in almost any other region of the country are no longer sufficient to secure a standard lease on a baseline apartment. The result of this economic squeeze is a profound and pervasive psychological trauma rooted in intense cognitive dissonance. The modern workforce has been raised on a fundamental social contract. If an individual pursues higher education, avoids financial recklessness, and secures stable, full-time professional employment, society rewards them with basic stability and shelter. When these workers do everything exactly according to the rules and find themselves still unable to afford a modest apartment within an hour of their workplace, the psychological fallout is immediate. It fosters a deep sense of alienation, leaving workers to confront the terrifying reality that they have become economically incompatible with the very cities that rely on their daily labor to survive. The infinite wealth engine versus the finite grid. To understand how this crisis materialized, it is necessary to examine the structural friction between two competing economic forces, the infinite scale of digital commerce and the absolute limits of physical geography. The primary driver of hyperinflation in tech hubs is the unprecedented nature of modern tech monopolies and venture capital networks. Companies specializing in software, cloud computing, and global digital infrastructure do not operate under the traditional constraints of physical manufacturing. A software enterprise can scale its products to billions of global users with near zero marginal cost, generating astronomical profit margins and creating historic concentrations of corporate wealth. When these corporations compensate their top-tier talent, software engineers, data scientists, and senior product managers, they distribute massive waves of liquidity directly into a highly concentrated local ecosystem. Over the course of a single decade, these infinite wealth engines have minted tens of thousands of multi-six-figure salaries and stock option millionaires within small, isolated geographic pockets. However, this virtually limitless digital wealth eventually collides with the uncompromising reality of finite physical grid. If one looks closely at the maps of Seattle or the San Francisco Peninsula, the physical bottlenecks become immediately obvious. Seattle is tightly pinched between the waters of Puget Sound and Lake Washington. San Francisco occupies the tip of a narrow, 12-mile peninsula, bounded on three sides by the Pacific Ocean and the San Francisco Bay. Silicon Valley sits hemmed in between the Santa Cruz Mountains and the East Bay Hills. There's a fixed, non-negotiable supply of land. When a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporate campus drops into these physically restricted corridors, it acts as an economic tractor beam, pulling in an affluent workforce that competes aggressively for a static amount of housing. This concentration of high-earning individuals shifts the local baseline cost of everything. Landlords realize they can instantly raise rents to match the disposable income of incoming tech professionals. Local businesses, supermarkets, gas stations, and service providers follow suit, readjusting their pricing structures to capture the premium capital circulating through the region. This creates a severe penalty for anyone working outside the software sector. Paramedics, municipal clerks, administrative assistants, and retail managers see their local cost of living driven up by a global tech boom in which they do not participate. Their wages remain anchored to traditional, slow-growing national scales, while their local expenses are dictated by an international elite, forcing a rapid, systemic decoupling of local wages from the local cost of basic survival. The ghost towns of Silicon Valley's parking lots. When night falls over industrial parks and suburban avenues in cities like Mountain View, Palo Alto, or Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, an entire covert infrastructure hums to life. Streets that appear to be standard commercial zones during the day transform into makeshift, mobile residential communities after hours. This is a domain of vehicular residency, where late-model sport utility vehicles, cargo vans, and aging recreational vehicles serve as the primary shelter for cities' essential workforce. Because most affluent municipalities aggressively enforce strict anti-camping ordinances and overnight parking bans, this community must operate with extreme discretion, mastering an elaborate, nightly dance to avoid corporate or municipal scrutiny. As captured in urban centers across the Bay Area, rows of recreational vehicles line public streets, positioned bumper to bumper to maximize limited curb space. In this visual landscape, look closely at the juxtaposition. These vehicles are parked directly outside manicured corporate parks and residential zones, functioning as highly visible markers of an invisible community. The presence of a resident navigating the corridor highlights that these vehicles are not abandoned property. They are actively managed, occupied homes belonging to individuals who must constantly balance their proximity to employment with the threat of displacement. Living within this infrastructure requires maintaining a grueling dual identity. Consider the daily routine of a public school teacher or a corporate administrative assistant residing in a compact sedan. Their evenings are spent grading assignments or managing spreadsheets under the dim illumination of a battery-powered dome light, their entire professional wardrobe meticulously organized into plastic storage bins in the trunk. When morning arrives, the vehicle dwellers execute a coordinated migration to local 24-hour fitness centers or public community centers. They enter these facilities not to exercise, but to utilize the showers, shave, and iron their clothes, ensuring they can walk into a professional workplace at 9 in the morning looking completely indistinguishable from their housed colleagues. The baseline existence of the working unhoused is defined by a state of hypervigilance, dominated by the constant fear of an event known simply as the knock. This is the midnight encounter when a heavy flashlight raps against the vehicle window, accompanied by the voice of a private security guard or municipal police officer ordering the occupant to move their vehicle immediately. Whether the interaction results in a costly civil citation or the immediate threat of vehicle impoundment, the experience completely shatters any sense of psychological safety. It forces an exhausted worker to start their engine at 2 in the morning, navigating dark, unfamiliar streets in a desperate search for another temporary patch of curb before their shift begins. The cruel mathematics of survival. The slide into vehicular homelessness is dictated by a rigid, mathematical process rather than personal negligence. To understand this trajectory, one must break down the financial reality of a worker earning an $80,000 salary within a major tech hub. In the vast majority of the United States, an $80,000 income represents a stable, comfortable middle-class life. However, within the premium economic zones of the West Coast, that figure undergoes an immediate, aggressive contraction. A gross annual salary of $80,000 translates to roughly $6,600 a month. Once federal insurance contributions, state income taxes, mandatory healthcare premiums, and baseline retirement deductions are extracted, the actual net take-home pay drops to approximately $4,800 a month. When this net income faces a local rental market, the financial math collapses entirely. The median rent for a basic one-bedroom apartment in a tech hub regularly hovers between $2,800 and $3,500 a month. If a worker is fortunate enough to secure a lease at $3,000, that single housing expense consumes more than 60% of their total net income. This severely violates the traditional economic guidelines stating housing should never exceed 30% of a household's budget. The primary barrier, however, is not just a high price, but the structural gatekeeping enforced by corporate property management systems. The overwhelming majority of institutional landlords utilize automated tenant screening algorithms that mandate a strict income-to-rent ratio. To qualify for a $3,000 apartment, an applicant must demonstrate a gross monthly income equal to at least 3 times the monthly rent. For a $36,000 annual rental cost, the automated system requires proof of a $108,000 gross annual salary. Consequently, an individual making $80,000 is legally locked out of the conventional housing market by corporate algorithms, regardless of their excellent credit history or flawless employment records. This creates a state of total financial fragility. For those who manage to find non-traditional housing arrangements, such as renting an unpermitted room or sharing a crowded house, the remaining sliver of their income is instantly consumed by regional expenses. Hyperinflated utility rates, skyrocketing mandatory auto insurance premiums, student loan obligations, and elevated food costs reduce net savings to zero. This leaves absolutely no margin for error. Under these conditions, the transition from an apartment to a vehicle is rarely a slow, gradual decline. It is an instantaneous pivot triggered by a single point of structural failure: the NIMBY shield and the policy paradox. The expansion of the working homeless class is not an unpreventable natural disaster, nor is it a random anomaly of the free market. It is a direct, intended outcome of decades of explicit political decisions and local regulatory choices. The root cause of the housing shortage is a highly organized campaign of manufactured scarcity orchestrated by affluent local property owners. Longtime residents, seeking to insulate their neighborhoods from density and maximize the equity of their real estate holdings, effectively utilize local zoning boards and municipal planning commissions as a defensive shield. This defensive strategy is commonly referred to as NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. By leveraging their political influence, these groups have successfully maintained strict single-family zoning restrictions across 70 to 80% of residential land in wealthy suburban enclaves. This makes it legally impossible to construct high-density apartment complexes, multifamily townhomes, or affordable courtyard apartments. Furthermore, these groups frequently weaponize state-level environmental regulations, such as the California Environmental Quality Act, alongside local historical preservation ordinances. They use these frameworks to trap proposed housing developments in years of bureaucratic delays, environmental impact studies, and costly litigation. This process drives up development costs to prohibitive levels and forces developers to abandon affordable projects entirely. This dynamic exposes a profound progressive paradox within America's wealthiest metropolitan areas. The electorates of cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Berkeley consistently champion progressive social values on the national stage, vocally supporting income equality, humanitarian initiatives, and systemic economic reforms. The endgame, when a city hollows out. A modern metropolis cannot survive solely on high-earning software developers, corporate executives, and venture capitalists. An urban ecosystem is a deeply complex, interdependent network that requires a foundational layer of essential workers to maintain its basic functions. A city requires paramedics to respond to emergencies, diesel mechanics to service transit fleets, sanitation workers to manage waste, nurses to staff emergency rooms, and grocery clerks to keep supply chains functional. When the individuals who perform these critical roles can no longer afford shelter within 50 miles of their jobs, the fundamental infrastructure of the city begins to fracture. To maintain their employment without succumbing to literal street homelessness, thousands of essential workers are forced to become supercommuters. This group relocates to distant, low-cost inland valleys or remote rural counties, sacrificing hours of their lives every day to travel back and forth to the economic core. The supercommute routinely involves driving 3, 4, or even 5 hours round trip along heavily congested freeway corridors.